Square, was honored to be part of this project, along with, of course, Habitat Media, the filmmaker, Stonyfield and Gary Hirshberg, who are funders of the project, and many others that have been part for the last couple of years of making this film. And we appreciate all of your taking an evening out. We're honored also to have a panel of 4 esteemed gentlemen. Forgive us for not having ladies. There ought to be ladies here too. But we'll take these 4 for tonight to talk a bit more about the issue that you've seen this last hour from different perspectives. Those who have served inside the House and Senate, those working in business, and of course the filmmaker, Steve Cowan. And I'll ask each of them to say a couple of words. A few minutes at the start, I have a question to introduce each one of them. And then I hope we'll have plenty of time for all of you to ask your questions and for us to dig a bit deeper into the issue. Starting, if we could, with former Congressman Paul Hodes, who represented the 2nd District, including Concord until not so long ago, and who recently completed a rather bruising and expensive campaign for U.S. Senate. You, Mr. Congressman, as someone who have been inside the system, also an original co-sponsor of the Fair Elections Now Act that was featured in the film, would you expand a bit on your perspective on the nature of the problem today in Washington, and is there much of a chance, as you look at the politics in Washington, of actually advancing this reform?
I'm thinking before I speak. I suppose the first thing I ought to do is thank all of you who supported me, and especially for all your contributions over the years I ran. In my run for the United States Senate, I set a fundraising record inside New Hampshire. I raised about $1.5 million from individuals in New Hampshire, which was a record for a U.S. Senate candidate of either party. Overall, I raised $5 million, and I was outspent if you add my opponent's money and the money that came from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Karl Rove and the Koch brothers. I was outspent by approximately 3 to 1. My money basically ran out right around the time of the Republican primary, and I got no help, $0 from the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee or other sources. So I was basically on fumes for the last the last 2 months, basically.
You were on yogurt.
Yeah, I was on yogurt. But for those of you who were here and watched television, I didn't watch too much television, I knew what was happening, you could see the impact of the money difference. There were money bombs being dropped. There were 3 or 4 pieces of mail a day that were going into every household in New Hampshire, calling me that great Satan. And the television advertising was overwhelmingly for my opponent and against me in a variety of ways, and I was on fumes. So there's a graphic example of the cost of campaigns and whether or not there is a marketplace of ideas or there's just a marketplace of money. It's sort of sad and wonderful for me to see this important film. I know those people, I know the bills, I know the process, I know the lobbyists. I'll tell you 2 stories about the problem, and I just have 2 stories that come to mind. The first story is about a bill that I introduced. I made it my practice when I got to Washington not to take any contributions from those on whose behalf I had asked for an earmark. I figured, okay, it's part of the job to bring money back to my district, but I don't want anybody to think that there's any pay for play involved, that somehow, because I'm asking for an earmark, I'm going to get something from it. So I made it a practice not to take any money from the company, from their lobbyists, from their senior executives, and that was my practice. And I figured that since pay for play is the way business is done, I mean, that's it, folks. That is the way business is done in Washington. That's business as usual. The lobbyists bundle the money, they help write the legislation, they talk to the members of Congress, they get them in the halls, they come to the committee, they hold fundraisers for them. You saw it. I figured I'd break that cycle. So I introduced a bill called the Clear Act, and it simply said, thou shalt not take any money from those on whose behalf you asked for earmarks, because this was before they did away with earmarks. I also put in a bill to do that too. And I said, thou shalt not take any money for a period of 2 years, which would be an election cycle in the House of Representatives. Don't take any money from them. Filed the bill. It went to the appropriate committee, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. I went to the folks in the leadership, and I said, I filed this bill. I think this is a really good idea. Not only does it send a good message, but it would really change business as usual in Washington. I got this. I talked to my colleagues. I figured, okay, I've come into Congress in the class of 2006 as a reformer. We came in with the K Street corruption, with Jack Abramoff. We came in to clean things up. I'll talk to my classmates in the class of 2006. And when I told them what I proposed, they got it, I think, and they look at me and say, but that would change the way everything's done. And I said, well, that's the point, isn't it? It never got even a hearing in the committee. So that's story number one. Story number two, I was a member of the Financial Services Committee. And you will recall there was a little kerfuffle over what happened to the economy. And along the way, we proposed to deal with the way money is lent and to regulate credit and to regulate, put in regulations for lending money that would try to reform lending practices. Well, a lobbyist for a for-profit chain of colleges in Florida had been very kind to me and had invited me down to Florida, where I was given a lovely dinner by the people who owned a small string of for-profit colleges, and they had invited a number of their spouses and their employees, and had raised for me a pretty nice chunk of change. Trip to Florida, $20,000 from the dinner. And the bill came along that was going to regulate the practices in the private colleges of lending money to their students, which it turned out had not been so clean. There had been some real serious problems with the money lending practices, the way the private colleges were lending money to their students. And sure enough, the lobbyist came and he wanted to go out for another meal. We went out, because the rules are I took the lobbyist to lunch. It was the least I could do, after all. They had raised me $20,000. I took their lobbyist to lunch, and he said, you know, this bill is coming up, and we have been awfully good supporters of yours. We have been awfully good supporters. Now, I would never tell you, he said, that just because we've supported you, you should vote one way or another. But we've been awfully good supporters of yours. I said, I think I understand your position. Thank you very much. The bill came up in committee. The lobbyist was sitting right there. And I voted to regulate the lending practices of the private colleges. And it was the right thing to do, right? And I mean, the lobbyist was very unhappy. And when I ran for the Senate, did I get a penny from the private colleges? No. Two stories that tell you the way the game is played. Every member is susceptible to the kinds of influence that comes subtly and not so subtly.
Thank you, Congressman. I have a feeling there may be a few more stories where those come from. We appreciate your sharing them, and I hope in the conversation we can get more to to what's being attempted and how we can move it along. Next we have Steve Cowan, founder, director of Habitat Media based in Portland, Oregon. Obviously the maker of this film over the last couple of years. A long journey, I know it's been.
6 years.
6 years.
Wow.
I know, Steve, prior to Priceless, Habitat Media has made a couple of successful films, broadcast on PBS, on environmental issues. And I wonder where you turn from, you're not a politico exactly, where you turn from the less controversial issues perhaps of overfishing in the seas to money in politics, how you got on this journey in the first place, and why you've stuck with it all these years. As well, perhaps, about how this film has been received and what its path forward is.
Right, okay. Well, yeah, so we make films about environmental issues, typically, one problem at a time. And it's been, you know, we filmmakers in the nonprofit don't make a lot of money, but it's actually, given the number of environmental issues that come down the pike, it's a living, you know, and we could just keep doing one after another. But we kind of got a hint that maybe there's a root cause to a lot of them all. And that's one answer, sort of, to the question. But you know, we've done these films on fisheries. We were out in the Gulf of Mexico with fishermen, and once this one shrimp fisherman, they weren't catching anything, and he says, from horizon to horizon, we were way out. He said, this everything's dead here, everything. There's no oxygen in the water. It happens every spring, and everyone knows about it. NOAA knows about it. The federal government knows about it. Everyone knows about it. It happens every spring, and it's getting worse and worse. And we said, well, that's kind of strange. And he says, yeah, it's all the stuff that comes down the Mississippi River. It's full of nitrogen, chemical nitrogen fertilizer, and a lot of pesticides and herbicides. And it happens every year, and it's getting worse. And we can't make a living anymore. Pretty bitter bunch of fishermen. So we're thinking, well, maybe that's another documentary about, you know, the dead zone, the dead zone in the Gulf. We ended up going up into some of the farming communities in the Midwest that are growing the crops, that's the breadbasket of the U.S. They grow the corn and the soybeans and the wheat, and talk to some of the farmers there who are using the stuff that's going down to the Gulf. And a lot of these, you saw some of them in the film, a lot of these farmers they feel they have to use this stuff. They're growing, you know, 3,000 acres of corn or wheat or soybeans, and there's no way you can grow a crop like that without a lot of pesticides and a lot of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. And a lot of them know what it's doing. They know that the aquifers, their kids can't swim in the swimming holes anymore. The aquifers are all polluted with herbicides that are carcinogenic and worse. They know they've totally soiled their nest, so to speak, and they don't like it. These are intelligent people that don't want to be doing it. And they're hoping, they've been, year after year, they tell their congressperson, we need a farm bill that will help us transition to organic. We don't want to be operating this way. And it never happens. Year after year after year, it never happens. And so at that point, that's what sort of took us upstream to DC, and that's why we did the film. The other thing worth saying about in the 5 or 6 years we've been making this film, we've done, wherever we've been all over the country. We do a lot of what we call sidewalk interviews, where we just talk to anybody. It could be suburbanites putting away their groceries at a shopping center, or in rural areas, cities, Manhattan. We don't have that many in this film, but we have hundreds of interviews where I would typically ask whomever on the sidewalk, how do you feel about our democracy? And they'd usually say something positive, and I said, well, do you feel personally represented? And it's at that point, at least 90%, with no exaggeration, just said either something cynical or funny. It's like, no, or are you kidding, or give me a break, or they thought that was a ridiculous question. And I'd say, well, what's the deal? And they'd say, well, come on, everyone knows money's running everything. And I'd say, can you tell me how that happens? And I heard hundreds of different explanations about how that happens from people. And by and large, we realize most people don't know. They don't have time to know. They're busy making a living, raising kids. They don't have time to come to Washington D.C. and track what's really going on. They just don't know, but they know for sure something's wrong. And so that's partly why they gave us more impetus to make the film, is we want to make the film to show people exactly where we're losing our democracy. So there's my long-winded answer.
Thank you, Steve. Moving from the outside filmmaker back inside into the belly of the beast, if we may, former Senator Larry Pressler from South Dakota. You recently joined two of your former Republican colleagues, Alan Simpson, whom we saw in the film, and former New Hampshire Republican Senator Warren Rudman, in supporting Americans for Campaign Reform, which we're deeply appreciative of. And we appreciate your traveling here tonight. I think the issue is one which is often perceived as a rather partisan one. And the feeling is there's not much Republican support. We're glad to show many examples to the contrary, but I wonder if you would speak a little bit more to that as somebody who served many years in first the House and Senate as a Republican member from South Dakota, how you see this issue in your party and how more support perhaps could be built.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really moved by the number of people who have voted with their feet or whatever tonight. And I served in the Senate for 18 years with Warren Rudman and Judd Gregg. I see Judd still got his sign up over here, so I got to ask him how he does that. But I had a wonderful afternoon. I got here a little early, and I went to your wonderful museum, and I bought a book on the Native Americans in this part of the world. I have some grandchildren who live in Newburyport, and it's amazing. I bought a book called After Philip's War, which is way back when the Puritans were here, and we used to go out, if they were hunting for deer and they saw some Native Americans, they would shoot them also. It's just terrible. But anyway, so our country, we've come through a lot, and we've had a lot of problems. Anyway, well, I enjoyed this film. I think we're sort of going in circles, and I think every member of Congress would agree that they hate to raise money. And I certainly did. I spent 22 years in Congress, and it was the least pleasant part of my portfolio. But I have been talking some with a professor at Harvard Law School called Larry Lessig, who was on here briefly. The real basic problem, if we're going to come to the real problem of diagnosis, is our lobbying system that we have in Washington. It's the only capital in the world that has that sort of a system, and it's grown up, and there are good people in it. I'm not going to bash anybody here, but the system has grown up. It's the only one in the world. Now, England, they have some lobbying in London. They're starting to have some over in Brussels, but Washington D.C. is the only capital in the world where the first thing the Indian ambassador does when he comes to Washington is to hire another law firm or consulting firm to get money for India. And the same thing is true of all the impoverished countries in the world. And ambassadors from abroad are always somewhat aghast or whatever, they're surprised. I mean, this is in the millions of dollars that these impoverished countries spend on lobbyists. That's another aspect. The film couldn't cover everything. But why do we have that system? Well, it's because we have freedom of speech, and we like to be able to express ourselves. And we don't want to limit that freedom of speech. That's sort of the legal tradition. But I've talked to Lawrence Lessig some about devising a law that would be constitutional, that would say that everybody can lobby who wants to, but you just couldn't get paid for it. And it would, but it sounds harsh, but it would make it almost a criminal act for anyone to go about lobbying business, except as a volunteer. They can represent themselves or their friends, but you can't get paid for lobbying, because you can condemn the people who are there, but any person in this room could get elected to Congress at some future point, and you'd be in the thick of this system, and you would have to do the same thing. So we have to really look at the basic institution. I have to find a constitutional way to limit the whole lobbying system that we have, and that's on a bipartisan basis. I don't really want to get into partisanship on one side or another, but you know, there's a lot of people who say they're for a lot of stuff, but when it really comes to voting for it, they won't vote for it. And a lot of people, when they express their political philosophy, they're expressing their political philosophy to impress whoever's listening to them, and not what their real political philosophy is. So a lot of this is a lot of hot air, but we have had bipartisan successes in the past. The major campaign reforms that we've passed have been Republican initiatives. The Arizona law that we saw there was a Democratic governor down there, I believe, who got into some kind of trouble, and maybe it was just a partisan thing. But it was largely a Republican initiative. It was Howard Baker and Barry Goldwater who sponsored the reforms in the 1970s, I believe, and myself when I was in the House. But it was a bipartisan initiative. The narrative of the national media is that Republicans are against this and Democrats are for it. That is not necessarily true. Now, the movie didn't cover, and you can't cover everything, it's a wonderful movie, but labor unions, teachers unions, environmental groups, George Soros's of this world, that's a lot of money. And the Washington Post has just finished running running stories on the municipal unions in some states, western states mostly, how they just run negative ads on city councilmen and just get rid of them if they don't vote for every union demand. And that is equally, to me, a scandal. Because they're not talking about the issues, they're finding something wrong with the guy or his family or something, but it's well known that anybody in Nevada or California or some of those states, if they don't vote for exactly what the public unions want, they will be out of office, and in a very nasty way. And the Post ran a series on that. That's a problem. So anyway, but the Washington D.C. one, and on the state level, maybe, and Lawrence Lessig is trying to craft something, and I'm trying to help him a little bit, but we need to use our best legal minds to try to figure this thing out, because we could sit here all night and talk about what Republicans did or what Democrats did, or how bad Congress is, but unless we get to that, the nub of the problem is that we're the only country in the world that has a lobbying system like we have. And it's based on money. You get paid a lot of money to go lobby, and you can raise money for nobody's going to see you unless you can raise money for them. They might once or twice, but you've got to have raised some money for somebody before you can get an audience, as the movie said accurately. So we can say that over and over, and we can pound on ourselves and pound on congressmen and so forth, but we've got to start a very thoughtful, and I think this group here, Orange Group and Mr. Rao's group and so forth, are trying very hard. We've got to get some research done, and we've got to figure out, somebody has to have a new idea so that our capital isn't the only one in the world. They don't have this in most capitals in the world, and I think we should try to find a way to replace it.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you also for helping to dispel the perception that it is a one-sided issue, which it's not. Finally on our panel, as many of you know here, Gary Hirshberg, CEO of Stonyfield Yogurt. You're known, of course, as somebody, first of all, who makes yogurt, but I think we all detect in recent years a sort of stray at Stonyfield into political issues and movie making. Would you explain to us why Stonyfield is diversifying in this way, why you've decided to get involved here?
Well, first thing I want to say is thank you, Red River and Connie. This is what we hoped would happen. And Harold and all the others. I mean, this is a great night. This is awesome and a fabulous film. This issue, every issue, and I've been active in conservation and renewables and organics for a long time, for decades, and every one of these issues always comes back to campaign finance reform. It just does, and the senator said it beautifully, and Steve and Paul as well. You know, whenever I'm dealing with this issue, I'm reminded of my favorite Winston Churchill quote, which is that success is the ability to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And that's, you know, we have a failed system. It is seriously broken. And so, you know, we've all been up here yakking, and I know we want to have some dialogue. So I'm going to just answer you this way, Dan, and tell you all my quick story of why. And by the way, this isn't recent. We've been, you know, on this case for a long time. It's just not too many people have been listening. It's kind of like starting an organic yogurt company in '83. You know, we had a wonderful idea, just no supply and no demand. You know, 13 years ago, a group of biotech companies introduced genetically modified seeds into the American ag system. 50% of GMO crops in this world come out of the U.S. And in those 13 years, what we now know is that, particularly with herbicide-tolerant seeds, which is what Monsanto has been capitalizing on, we now know that we have seen an increase of 382 million tons of pesticides, of herbicides, of Roundup in our system of agriculture, in our streams, in our waters, and in our bodies. Worse than that, across the southern U.S. now, we're seeing an explosion, but also in the Senator's state and in other ag states, we're seeing an explosion of superweeds that are herbicide tolerant. That, you know, because now we have herbicide tolerant crops, we're putting down lots of herbicides because the farmers are free to do that because the crops are tolerant to them. And the weeds, you know, unlike us humans, they don't wait around to do market research to figure out what to do. They quickly evolve and become herbicide tolerant themselves. And what that means is that now farmers across this country are having to put defoliants down to kill their weeds. The last time a lot of you probably heard the word defoliants was Vietnam, Agent Orange, and that's what we're talking about, 2,4-D. So we have an explosion right now of herbicides and defoliants in this country, and Steve captured it beautifully, that, by the way, happen to be made by the very same companies who own the patents on these seeds. Just an interesting little coincidence. Those companies, biotech companies, in the last cycle alone, put tens of millions of dollars into people running for office. I traveled to New Zealand to represent the U.S. on a panel on trade, and I was with a congressman who was proud that he received $200,000 from Monsanto alone in the last cycle. You know, Paul's talking about 20,000 is a big hit. This, by the way, is thanks to you know, the Citizens United Act, which we saw. So I just want to you know, say what you've already heard in the film, but this is really what I want to say. Last year, the President's Cancer Panel, which was appointed by President Bush, came out with a conclusion that 41% of us in this country, almost 1 in 2, are going to be diagnosed with cancers in our lifetimes. That's almost 1 in 2. We know that obesity, which is now the #1 killer in this country, is a $150 billion hit to our country. Imagine if 1 in 2 of us have cancer. We have many friends in this audience who've been dealing with cancer. You know what the costs are. Imagine on a national scale 1 in 2. So the whole discussion last year about healthcare wasn't about healthcare because there was no discussion about preventative health, right? It was about sickness care. And I'm telling you all of this wonderfully depressing stuff because to me, the system, this is a living example. And so when Dan asks why Stonyfield is in it, you know, we believe that, well, all food through history was organic until 1940. Every famous person in history, George Washington, you know, Jesus Christ, Joan of Arc, everyone ate only organic food. Mozart ate only organic food. Look what he did, right? So, and you just heard from the scientists at Iowa State that we now know the yields are as good and are strong without the inputs and without the toxification. So for us, it's at the heart of our industry. It's at the heart of why we're there. By the way, I want to just end on 2 quick points. One, our farmers make more money. I have 1,800 dairy farmers across the country, including in your state, who earn more money because consumers are voting with our dollars to support organics. That is not true of conventional farmers at all. Conventional farmers on the decline. The second is we, in January, had watched everything that you just captured here, and all of you have commented on. We watched it come to a sort of crowning glory with the approval by the USDA of genetically engineered alfalfa, which is now legal. It was solving a problem that didn't exist. Alfalfa is used for hay. It's critical for organics in cows. Only 7% of alfalfa in this country was using herbicides. Now we have herbicide-tolerant alfalfa. Why? Because we watched the power of this incredible lobby, who of course made enormous amounts of money in the last 13 years, and they want to keep capitalizing on it. So we're starting. In fact, this morning we reached the $1.5 million level. We're starting a national effort to promote labeling of genetically modified foods, because 85% of consumers say they want to know what's in their food, and this is a right-to-know issue. And so I'm telling you this because, as the senator just said better than I, the system is broken, and we need new solutions. But right now, I only know one thing that gets these folks elected each cycle, and that's us. That's us. And we have to speak. And John and Dan and the wonderful group who put ACR together, that's all they're asking about, is for all of us to speak up. And you have spoken with your feet tonight. We need to speak in our votes. We need to tell our congresspeople in the next election and our senators in the next election that we want to know what's in our food. That we don't want we want a label that lets us choose. We're not saying you shouldn't, can't use this stuff. We're saying, though, we should be allowed to know. And that's going to have to come from citizens, because as you saw here tonight, it's not going to come out of a Congress that we don't have elections, we have sales right now. And so we've got to do this ourselves. So that's why we're in it.
Again, to Stonyfield for helping to make this film possible. There is a 9 o'clock showing of another film in this theater. So we're going to take a couple of questions, and I'll maybe invite a few questions and then invite our panelists to respond. Just before doing that, I want to acknowledge that these are 4 wonderful authorities. They're by no means the only authorities in this room. I see here Arnie Arneson, who's run for governor and experienced the system. John and Mary Rao, I think Martha Fuller Clark, former state senator, is here, and I'm sure many others. And thank you all again for being here tonight. Could I take a couple of brief questions and invite some brief responses? At the back.
Yes, the suggestion was made by the senator from South Dakota that perhaps if we just made it impossible for lobbyists to get paid, that would solve the problem. And I think the other possibility that I think I would tend to favor is simply eliminate the ability of lobbyists to channel financial resources to candidates, which would mean that while we have one person, one vote, it should be one person, one check of some amount, and no contributions from corporations, whether they be unions or for-profit companies and so forth, that all political contributions would have to come from individuals, living, breathing human beings, and have some limited amount. So you couldn't have one of the Koch brothers, let's say, sending a check for $10 million, and I send my check for $100 or $1,000. Just
thank you.
Because saying that lobbyists can't get paid, I know some very good humanitarian lobbyists that are lobbying for world hunger and for causes that I think are important, including the environment. So I'm not sure I'd want to completely cut off the ability of lobbyists, or even, saying they can't get paid.
Thank you. So thank you. A good suggestion regarding lobbying and having only individuals giving. Let me invite 2 more questions, and then we'll turn it over to whoever on the panel wishes to respond. There at the back, and then here in the blue. At the back.
Okay, so I think one of the important issues we kind of touched on as part of this movie is that we can't outspend our way to defeating these corporations and these vested interests. So I think our most powerful asset is people, and I was wondering, what the panelists thought of how do we organize these people and build these political wills to build strong communities and fight these vested interests.
So winning with people rather than dollars, organizing at the grassroots level. Thank you. One more question here in the blue.
I'm just wondering how many candidates can the state or the government afford to fund with public funding? Like, could the state hypothetically fund 250 candidates with public funding? Like, at what point does that have an impact on the bottom line?
Great, thank you. I'm going to invite the panel to jump in. I'm just going to briefly speak to the first one, a factual point. The public funding proposal briefly presented here, the Fair Elections Now Act, would not let any candidate who's looking for a bit of PR cash in on a government check. You'd have to show you're a viable candidate, and the bill proposes that you would do that by raising at least 1,500 individual checks from citizens, nobody else, within your state. And those checks can be up to $100, at least $5, and they've got to average 33, so you're not getting a whole lot of tiny checks. If you can cross that threshold, we would say you're a serious candidate, all of those folks we saw in Arizona, and you then receive public funds, not enormous lump sums, but matching dollars out of a public fund to run a viable campaign. The estimated total cost, if we were to do this for all House, Senate, presidential elections, is somewhere between $1.5 billion per year, which is about 0.014% of the federal budget. It's not insignificant, particularly today, but we would argue, as people like Alan Simpson, our co-chair, have done, that the amount of waste that follows from the current system is far more than the cost of the program. But we've had a question on lobbying, on building a grassroots movement. Paul, would you start?
Sure, let me thank you for the question, because when I decided to run for Congress, I decided to run as an ordinary citizen because I wanted to help change the direction of the country. I ran once and lost, didn't raise a lot of money, raised some more money, got some help, and won. And the reason I won was because I got more votes than the other guy. And that's still the way it works in this country. And think about what's just happened in North Africa. There have been revolutions born because of a new information society. Twitter, Facebook, social media, people have organized using new tools that, while they've made disinformation available in greater quantities, have also made the exchange of information and organizing available to re-democratize a lot of what can be done. I would say that here we are in this room. If you think about it, I'd often say to people, well, if you want to change something, if each one of you got 10 people to change their views on this subject and do something about it, think about what that would mean. Just look in this room. What do we got? 150 people? Think about what that would mean if they got 10 more people. And John Rao's work and Dan's work and what American for Campaign Reform is doing is a perfect vehicle to get involved in this issue. And by the way, we're in New Hampshire, where every 4 years the circus comes to town. The eyes of the world and the media are upon us. Now would be a very good time to organize around this issue and make it clear that here in New Hampshire, we believe it's time to change the system.
Yeah, just real quick, you know, with this Citizens United thing and the ability of these giant industries to put in giant money into these elections, whomever asked that question, how do we the people deal with that? I really think it is time for we the people to, it's not going to come from the top down. And I really agree with you that it's, you know, if everyone could get involved with a group like John and Dan's group, that's the beginnings of it all. It really has to come at this point, I think, from we the people, because I don't see it coming from Washington, D.C.
And two more brief comments. Thank you.
Okay, I very much appreciate the comments of the gentleman and many others. Take a look, go on Google tonight and look up Lawrence Lessig. He was in the movie, but he's a friend of mine, a Harvard law professor, and he's been researching new ideas and how, so we could be for something, but not only him, but law professors around the country. You know, we used to elect the United States senators by the state legislature, and then we had a fundamental change with a constitutional amendment to elect them by direct election, but the people have sort of lost that again. So we might need to have a constitutional amendment or a law. And it wouldn't just be the lobbyists can't get paid, or they'd be more who can regulate, who can lobby for money, but who can present, if they're raising money at the same time, they shouldn't be there. And that could be passed constitutionally. But that's the root of the problem. All these other things we're talking about are just evidence of the disease, but the root of the disease is the unique American lobbying system.
And a final comment, Gary.
I support Gandhi's comment that anyone who thinks they're too small to make a difference has never been in bed with a mosquito. So we gotta vote. One stain, one bite, one vote.
Now, I know a great deal more could be said. We're very sorry that we are out of time, but we've asked if the panelists might hang around a couple more minutes. I know Red River, whom we deeply appreciate for having us here, has beer and wine and all the rest. If you care to stick around a little bit, as well as more showings tonight. But for a final word on what you can do right here and now, my colleague, Rob Werner.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. What a terrific program. There's an open letter to our congressional delegation that's out in the lobby. I urge all of you to sign that letter. It's a simple statement asking our representatives to pay attention to the issues that we've been talking about tonight in a real way. And we'll take those and bring them to the congressional offices. But we want to see as many signatures on that piece of paper as are people in this room. So please do that. Please do that before leaving. And thank you so much for being here tonight.
And finally, please spread the message. Habitat Media has copies of the film available through their website, habitatmedia.org. It's being shown around the country. We want to help get the message out. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.